Ready to go. I'm very, very excited to have you all here, to have you with us this morning for a very, very exciting topic. I see it's 50 people more or less at the moment, so we can already say it's the biggest HR breakfast club ever. So we already have a record today. Isn't that great? And before we really dive into the topic, I would, of course, like to chance to introduce myself real quick, and of course, to give you a little bit of insight what we are actually planning, what our mission actually is with the HR Breakfast Club. So, as I said, I'm Martina, and actually I have always been driven to enable people and to enable organizations to really discover their full potential. So it's actually no big surprise that I ended up in HR, that I started my career there. And it's been over 10 years actually now, and I've worked in different HR positions, also in leadership positions. Today I'm a business coach and a consultant for personal and organizational development. And when I have a look at my work at the moment, I would say the hottest topics, or the most relevant topics. There we are. It's just a little bit, the presentation needs some time today, but that's fine. So the hottest topics I'm working with actually at the moment is, it's all about leadership. It's how are we going to work together, and how do we keep on learning? And when it comes to leadership, I like to call it new age leadership, because we really have to think it differently, right? And especially in times like these, with a lot of volatility and instability, not only, but especially young and first-time leaders are really struggling to keep their teams afloat, to keep their teams motivated. So I see that there's a lot of need for coaching, for developing those leadership teams, to prepare them not only for today, but also for the future. And when it comes to how are we going to work together, I like to use the word real new work, because I just think there are way too many buzzwords flying around when it comes to new work. So real new work for me is actually answering the question, how are we going to work together? So how are we going to keep up productivity? How are we going to keep up a good way of communicating with each other? And how can we increase cooperation, all while we're working from a distance? So I see a lot of need in helping companies to set up remote work strategies, instead of just putting like home office rules in place. And last but not least, it's all about keep on learning, and especially learning from what we are facing and what the challenges are at the moment. So when I began working in personal development, it was all about like setting up training plans and figuring out the right budget. But even so, of course, these are topics. I think it's more important today to create room, to create formats, to enable people to give feedback, to have retrospectives, and to really learn from what they're doing at the moment to evolve for the future. So what all these topics have in common, it's quite, first of all, it's quite complex, right? It's not really just put one thing in and then you get out whatever you want. And the other hand, of course, these are all topics HR is involved in. Either you have somebody like me coming in from the outside, then HR is always my strongest ally, making sure that this is not just a one-time thing where everybody's saying, yay, we got this leadership course, but now everything just goes back to as it was. And many of you even have these topics on their plate themselves. And this is why, or this is how we see HR as the enabler of the organization. So you are the ones making sure that your organization is ready for whatever comes, not only for dealing with the challenges of today, but of course also with them for the future. But when it comes to HR, sometimes I see that it is the case, or to be open, it's quite often the case that you have just a lot of things on your plate, right? There are many stakeholders, many topics, a huge variety of topics also, and a lot of expectation. So sometimes it's really hard to keep that flexibility and to stay on top of all these topics to really make sure that you can be the enabler you want to be for your organization. But no worries, this is where the HR Breakfast Club kicks in, here to the rescue, making sure that you have all the skills, tips, hacks, and last but not least, the right network to be ahead of all your topics and to fill that role that your organization actually needs from you. So, and I think we all agree, because you're here this morning, that people analytics is a super important part of that portfolio of skills that that HR needs to have. But what I find is that I think we pretty much agree on the importance, but very often we have this that is combined with a little bit of doubt, of uncertainty. It's like, yeah, I know it's important, but where do I get the right data? I know it's important, but what are the numbers that I can report? I know it's important, but I don't feel that this data is really correct that I'm using, right? So we are here today, and I'm super happy that it's going to be all about getting rid of the doubts, getting rid of the uncertainty, but really embrace and love the data that we get out of people analytics. And with no further ado, I would like to give up the stage for Deanna, our superwoman of the day, making sure that we are leaving the session loving and embracing data. So please all enjoy Deanna's session. I'm super sure that it's going to be awesome and very helpful.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. My name is Deanna and I'm a data scientist from San Francisco specializing in people analytics. So I've worked in people analytics at Tesla for 3 years, at Tourlane for 1 year, and most recently I've been working on helping Berlin startups to set up their own people analytics practice. So to give you a bit of background about me, something that you may be surprised to learn is that I'm not and never was a really big technical and math person. I actually studied political science and communications for my bachelor's, and 5 years ago, I never would have actually imagined that I would have ended up as a data scientist. So this might leave you wondering, how did I get into people analytics and why do I like working with data? Well, it all started when I took my first job in recruiting after uni. And in this first job, I was a recruiting coordinator at Tesla. My role was really administrative at this point, and I was just scheduling interviews, emailing candidates, and making sure we were tracking everything correctly. But gradually, my work evolved from tracking to measuring, and the more I measured, the more I realized how cool it was to put numbers behind recruiting, which is something that is inherently a bit subjective. I realized that data isn't about math so much as it is about getting context and improving decision-making. So spending another 2 years at Tesla, I developed the company's first recruiting KPIs, and I designed solutions to help HR partners access and understand their data better. This is where I realized my passion for people analytics, which is not entirely in the analytics part, but actually more on the people side. I love the idea of giving HR a more objective voice and empowering HR professionals to be more data-driven. Further, I think it's super interesting to connect data to HR, which is typically seen as a more interpersonal and intuitive field of work. So that's why I'm here today, to talk to you about people analytics, and hopefully the content I'm sharing can give you a place to start and inspire you to get started with people analytics at your company. So the big question is that we're asking today, why aren't more companies in Berlin using people analytics? In preparation for this talk, we asked participants to complete a survey that helped us gather information on how HR data is used in Berlin at the moment. So let's use that as a jumping point to identify some obstacles to entry and get a better understanding of the current landscape. In the first survey question, we asked participants to share the size of their company, and we found that 84% of respondents come from a company that's 300 people or smaller. There's two insights I want to share about what I see here. First, that it's super, super, super cool, actually, that so many HR people from small companies are interested in being more data-driven. The fact that over 100 of you signed up for this talk and see this as a priority early on and want to get ahead in this area is something that I'm actually blown away by. I think this is super cool. Next, I want to call out that small companies may not think to look at HR data because they might assume there's not a lot of data to look at. And this is partially true, because if you have fewer employees and smaller recruitment, you have less data. However, this doesn't diminish the importance of data quality and consistency. Because if HR teams don't pay attention to their data early, the problem becomes super time consuming and super expensive to resolve as the company grows. So essentially, to boil it all down, bad process leads to bad data, which leads to bad analytics. And as the saying goes in the data world, garbage in means garbage out. So in my personal experience with a company I've worked for, it took me 3 months to overcome data quality challenges that prevented us from reporting even the most basic recruiting metrics. When I calculated the cost of work time and meeting time it took to resolve basic data quality issues, the total cost came out to 24,000 euros and 70 hours of meeting time. So as you can see, early adoption of analytics as a mindset in HR is a huge cost saver in the long run. This company I worked for had about 400 employees at the time, and they invested effort in, and had they invested effort in setting up the right processes earlier, they would have avoided the extensive back work that was needed to get the right data when they needed it. So the point I want to drive here is that whether or not you think your HR data is extremely useful to you at the moment, there's no doubt that you'll need it as your company scales and grows. You want to have clean and reliable data as soon as possible to ensure that you're able to benchmark as well as use past data to forecast future trends. So to reiterate, the point that I want to make here is that it's never too early to start with good data management practices. Later on this presentation, we can go over where to get started on this, regardless of how big your company is now and how fast it plans to grow. So here in the next question, we ask participants to respond to the statement, I'm easily able to analyze and access my company's HR data. And what we see here is in the blue, of all survey respondents, only about 54% strongly agree or agree with the statement. So this means that just over half of participants are confident in their ability to get the data they need when they need it and to understand it, while the rest, here in red, are either neutral, suggesting they're unsure, or unable, responding disagree or strongly disagree. I think this points to a clear barrier as to why people analytics is not being used more in Berlin companies. Because if HR isn't confident in their ability to access and understand their own data, who else at the company can? We can circle back on how we can change this in a few slides. So next, we're at the third survey question, which asks participants to respond to the statement, I find my company's HR data to be consistent and accurate. So here, within the blue, we actually had no respondents strongly agreeing and 43% of respondents agreeing. So this means that half of participants are confident in the quality of their data, while half are either unsure or question it. Again, the results suggest that there's plenty of room for improvement in data quality, and the fact that we can recognize this so early on gives us a great opportunity to implement changes before it becomes a larger issue. Next, we ask participants to respond to the statement, my team reports core HR metrics to HR managers, managers in general, and executives on a regular basis. So we see here that less than 29% of participants are confident in this, responding strongly agree or agree. Of participants who are confident in their responses to the last two questions, only a fourth are also confident in their response to this question. So, in other words, just over 1/4 of HR professionals in Berlin are giving their leadership visibility of basic HR metrics. And of the companies where HR feels good about its data quality and understand its data, only a fourth of those are actually sharing key insights regularly. I think this points to a huge disconnect between HR and greater business strategy, because we always see sales, marketing, operations, and product teams measuring performance and tracking progress towards their OKRs with data. I think HR should be no exception, and in fact, it's arguably the most important part of the company to understand using data. Because if you've heard the saying that employees are every company's greatest asset, they're also the company's greatest cost. So essentially, if employees are spending most of their money on employing their people, they naturally should take a very data-driven approach to hiring, engaging, and retaining them. We will go over how we can make this happen shortly. So the last two questions are going to give us a pretty good idea of the current landscape of people analytics in Berlin. And in response to this question of how does your company currently use HR data, participants wrote short answer responses, which I've grouped together into 4 main themes. You'll see here that about 43% of respondents said that they rarely or didn't at all use HR data. And then you have about 39% saying that they have basic reporting, but from their HCM only. HCM standing for Human Capital Management System, HR system for short, or just as an example, Personio, Bamboo HR, or Workday. And then you see 14% saying that they report from their ATS only, ATS standing for Applicant Tracking System, and a great example of that is Greenhouse. Finally, you see only just under 4% actually integrating data from multiple sources and reporting with a more holistic view. So in general, this breakdown reinforces our findings from previous questions that show us HR data is super underutilized in Berlin companies and is almost never joined with other data sources. The result of this is that even when metrics are reported, they aren't going to be directly helpful at face value. Finally, the last question that we asked our participants was, what are some challenges you face with HR data? Once again, I grouped the free text responses into themes, and I found that companies wanting to use their HR data are challenged by getting started, making it relevant, needing expertise and tools, and data quality. We see roughly the same split for each theme, and our findings here once again largely reinforce what we inferred in the previous questions. So to summarize and loop this all back to our big question of why aren't we already using people analytics, our survey results indicate 4 major obstacles. First, getting started by means of accessing and understanding HR data. Second, data quality, which is ensuring ongoing accuracy and consistency of HR data. Third, reporting, in other words, making HR data relevant to company leaders. And fourth, resources, which is getting the right skills and tools to take HR data to the next level.
Deanna, do you mind if I just jump in real quick, because I really liked one idea that you brought up, that people analytics, it's not only good because we get the data out of it, we have more clarity and a stronger foundation for our decisions, but also that it helps to connect HR to the company actually, because this is something that I see very often in my work, that is like the HR department is not really connected to the company, to the business strategy, to how decisions are made, that they have sometimes they're like this little extra bird that we're turning to when something goes wrong, but it's not really like integrated. So I really like the idea of how this would give us the chance to connect.
Yes, definitely. And I think, as I mentioned, the big difference here is that all these other departments are using data to back their decisions and to convince leadership that certain decisions should happen. So I think if HR can do the same, it would position HR as a stronger partner and give more credibility to the things that we think are important.
Yeah. And would you mind, even so we said that we want to push all questions to the end, I think there's one question concerning understanding, and it is, what do you mean by integrated reporting? Maybe you just want to give some more details on that.
Sure. So integrated reporting implies taking data from different systems and putting them together so you understand what's happening better. So let me give an example of this. When I was working for Tourlane, we had a marketing campaign where we had different ads put out to try to get more applications for a certain position. And what we were trying to find out is where did the most applications and the most successful candidates come from? So to do this, we had to connect our recruiting data to our marketing data. And this is what I mean by integrated, is kind of integrating your data sources to your company's data warehouse, which is often something that your BI team manages. And typically at any company, even a small startup, you have your BI team integrating your sales data, your marketing data, customer data, operations data, product data. And what I've seen is that actually HR data is the last thing in there. So what I mean by integrated reporting is getting this data into their data warehouse and making it possible to report HR data along with other sources in dashboards in Looker or in Tableau.
And would that also imply, like, if I also see many companies working with different HR tools, so they have Personio, and then they maybe have something like Leapsum, and then maybe something else, and also putting data from these different sources together, this would also be integrated reporting, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, so now we are at this part of the talk that you've all been waiting for. How can we overcome these challenges, and what can we do to really bring value from our HR data? So we can tackle these one by one. And the first challenge here is, how do we improve access and understanding of HR data so our HR teams can get started with people analytics? I think what's really helpful here is to provide an overview of data sources that are relevant for early stage people analytics, and then we can go over what kind of data and insights we should ideally get from them. So these kind of, they might seem kind of obvious to some of you, but hopefully seeing everything in front of you is a helpful visualization that clarifies what should be accessible and where to find it. Note to make is, of course, you need to set up your systems in a way that collects usable data, and you need to establish processes to keep your data accurate, but that's a topic for the next section. For basic people analytics, there are three main types of data. As you can see here, we have recruiting, we have HR, and we have finance. Within recruiting, we would usually always have an applicant tracking system, or ATS. This is where we can expect to get all information about the hiring process, for example, where candidates applied from, what job they applied to, what interview stages they passed, feedback from interviewers, feedback from candidates, and how long it takes each candidate to get through the process. So we can measure recruiting performance in terms of metrics such as hire success rate, volume of recruiting, activity, time in each interview stage, and candidate experience. Then for HR, we have mainly our human capital management system, or HCM, where we should be able to find all information about employees hired, such as their personal contact info, job info, absences, compensation, what organizations they belong to, and what management chains they're in. We can use this data to measure headcount growth over time, absence rates, compensation bands, and so on. So sometimes you'll have a more sophisticated HCM that has capabilities to store performance, engagement, and L&D data, L&D meaning learning and development, but often these are separate systems. And for smaller companies, you may or may not have yet invested in tools to capture this kind of data, but of course, as you know, there's huge value in it. And understanding what drives performance and engagement, as well as measuring employee development, are critical factors in both determining your company's productivity and retention. So it should definitely rank high on your priority list in some way, to in some way capture especially performance and engagement data as early as possible. In the absence of a performance and engagement tool, what you could do is collect this data in your HR system. In Personio, for example, I know you can create custom fields, and what you need to do is basically just set it up in a way so that the data is stored there in some kind of standardized format. And when you are able to get a performance or engagement platform later, at least you have historical data that you can compare to. So last, from finance, we have payroll and accounting data, which you may be surprised to see here. And you may think, why don't we just take salary information from our HR system? For years, I thought the same until I was asked to calculate cost of employment per month. Cost of employment is not only each employee's salary, but also the amount that the company pays in social taxes and health insurance. And in Germany, it ends up being about 121% of each employee's gross salary, which you could calculate manually, but things get really complicated when you take into account employees starting and leaving mid-month, as well as internal transfers, as well as raises and bonuses. So long story short, it's much easier to use payroll data when determining the cost of employment because this is the true and factual count of what your company paid for each employee every month. Likewise, leveraging accounting data on candidate travel expenses, agency fees, headhunter fees, subscription fees, job board fees, and freelancer support is much more accurate than secondary records that you might store in Excel when calculating cost per hire, which is, I think, a pretty relevant metric for recruiting. At the end of the day, the exact data points found in each system are going to vary a lot based on how your team sets it up. What's important to remember is that data entered is data that can be extracted. And once again, garbage in means garbage out. So if you find yourself unable to get what you need from your system, this might be that the data is not entered, this data does not exist the way you want it because it wasn't entered that way. I'm going to say that again because I stuttered a bit. If you find yourself unable to get what you need from your system, it might be that this data doesn't exist the way you want it because it wasn't entered that way. And because of this, what's worth investigating is how to get the most from each system, which is something that an account manager or customer success representative can help with. I personally spent hours in contact with Greenhouse's customer success manager to understand Greenhouse's capabilities better. And what I can say is that it definitely helped me change a lot of Tourlane's setup to make our recruiting data much more clear and accessible. And a final point I want to make here is to avoid as much as possible tracking things in personal spreadsheets. Systems like Greenhouse and Personio exist. We can have one single source of truth for tracking candidates and employees. And it might seem like a quick and easy fix to track hires in a Google sheet, but what this actually does is double the data entry effort for recruiters and increase the risk of error. So again, it sounds a little bit obvious, but simply enforcing that recruiters mark their candidate as hired on the day that the offer is accepted is the best way to capture hire information and be able to extract it easily later. I guarantee that if you do this and make it a habit, you'll be able to export out of your ATS data that shows hires per week or month or year or quarter with all the relevant breakdowns, including hiring manager, job title, department, start date, and so on. So to bring it all together and to summarize, please, please avoid Excel spreadsheets at all costs and instead focus on getting the most out of your systems by using the reporting features.
Great. Would you mind if I ask another question? I was wondering if, as some of these data sources are not within like the HR department and under the power of HR, from your practical experience, are there some tips, tricks, hacks you can share how to approach other departments to share or to support HR with getting this data? Because I can imagine that if you show up at your BI team saying, well, guys, I need you to do this, because usually, I mean, they're pretty busy with the marketing data, right? Or also finance to give you the numbers you need or you want or you just want to check. Is there anything that you can advise us on how to approach other departments on this topic?
Yes, definitely. I have definitely been in the situation where BI is way too busy to support with this greater objective we have of wanting to integrate our HR data. And as well, approaching finance to get this payroll and accounting data. It's been pretty painful in past experiences, but I think what really convinced them to get on board, to get on the same page with us is really getting buy-in from your company leaders that HR data is important. And I think the best way to sell them on this is to tell them and show them what is possible with HR data if we integrate our data sources, and the value that it brings you once you have all your data in one place, and all the automation that can take place if this happens. So I think the most relevant one for smaller companies and growing startups would be to automate workforce planning, which would be to take past recruiting data, link that to your HR data, link that to your finance data, and to figure out how much headcount cost fluctuates over time, to be able to look back and say, okay, we spent this much this month, and this month on employing employees. This is how fast we hired people, and this is how many people we had in each role at this time. And based on how we want the company to grow, and what revenue targets we need to hit, what do we need to hire, and how fast can we hire them? How long will that take? So kind of linking all of these data sources together allows you to have this very comprehensive picture of this is what happened. Using this data, we can project that this will happen. And doing this in a way where you don't have to constantly extract Excel spreadsheets, update formulas, and stitch things together. This is really the value of integration, I think. And once you convince your leaders that this is important and this is really going to help, this is going to save you a lot of money, I think it's a no-brainer for everyone else to participate and to collaborate with you on it.
Yeah. So again, it's about connecting HR to the company's goals, and that is usually making money, at least part of it. So this helps. Great, thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay, so this is a great segue into our next challenge, which is data quality. So data quality. To understand how we can get accurate and consistent data, I would love to go over the basics of how data is generated with you. Once again, maybe it's a little bit obvious for some people, but just to make sure we're all on the same page, here's a diagram that we can see at the end here at the right. Insights are patterns and trends that tell us what's going on. And based on the direction of the arrow, you can see that we get insights from data, and data is captured from our systems. Then you might notice that data is generated through process. For example, a recruiter moving a candidate through each interview stage. So in this example, if 4 recruiters are hiring for the same role, and each of them has a different understanding of when to move a candidate from one stage to the next, this affects the timestamps associated with when each candidate enters the interview stage and when they exit. So in this example, in order to generate consistent data on how long candidates spend in each interview stage from start to finish, there must be clarity among recruiters on when to disposition the candidates. For example, do we move a candidate from phone screen to on-site once the phone screen has been finished, or when the on-site has been scheduled? It doesn't really matter, minor details, but it's important to align on this. And as you can see here, the process is affected by definitions. If there's no alignment on the definition of interview stage, the process is inconsistent, and therefore the data is also inconsistent. And as a result, the insights are meaningless or misleading. So as you can see, aligning processes and underlying definitions are crucial foundations to good analytics. Oops, sorry. Where was I? Yes, so there are things, these are definitely things you don't need advanced technical knowledge to do to align processes. And while they might seem like minor details, they make a big difference because data is precise and small inconsistencies can lead to bigger issues. So therefore, it's important to sit down with everyone on the team and align on basic definitions so that process is consistent and therefore data is consistent. In another personal example, I was once asked to report the number of salespeople for every month in the past year. The company I was working with had about 10 different names for the same sales associate job in their HR system, and also their sales coaches, sales leads, and sales operations. So when I was looking around for some clarity, it seemed like everyone I asked had a different understanding of who to include in this headcount, and it didn't help that there were so many variations of the same position. I would say to avoid situations like this, you can standardize data entry by setting up each data point to be a drop list selection instead of a free text entry. So for example, instead of having this text box that you can type in whatever you want for a position's name during onboarding. What you can do instead is have a set list of job titles that prevents typos and different names for the same job. And working with Personio, for example, I know this is definitely something you can do. So for companies using Personio, definitely do this. Because if you do this, you know, rather than allowing anyone to write what they want, there's a list of predefined options, and whoever enters the data can select from these options. At the end, you know, you can always add more job titles to the drop list, and maybe it seems a bit tedious to have to manage that, but I think it definitely beats having to go back and change everything at a later date. Once again, it took me 3 months to do this, so just to kind of remind you of the impact, definitely better to be proactive and to set things up right the first time.
And is there also something you can advise us on how to, first of all, set up the process and definition? So would you suggest getting together as a team and discuss and align? Or is it something you would say, no, you have to be strict, there has to be one person creating the drop down and then there's nothing else? And also, is there anything you can advise us on so that we don't lose track on our clean data during the process? Especially when it comes to larger teams, right? If it's just 2, 3, 4 people, maybe that's fine, but especially in larger recruiting teams or HR teams.
Definitely, yes. So I think you definitely need to have a conversation and like set aside an hour, even 2 hours to sit down and align on literally every definition for all the data points you see in your HR system, recruiting system, respectively. Because I think this is really where this is the foundation of analytics, is that the people who are entering the data need to know the impact of what they're doing on the data and how what they're doing changes metrics that we're measuring. So I would suggest sitting down, talking about it, going through every data point that's being tracked in the system. I would say that in Greenhouse, maybe there's like 30 to 40. In Personio, it depends on how many custom fields you have, but really just aligning on what it should look like, and like even documenting this, having like a file for this, a data dictionary, and as part of your team's onboarding process when you get new hires, making sure that this person that's joining the team is looking at this and is also on board with the same definitions.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So the third challenge would be reporting and making HR data relevant. I think the best advice I can give here is to focus not on metrics and KPIs specifically, but instead to focus on answering a broader question, specifically one that's relevant to company leaders. So for instance, how effective is our recruitment is a loaded question. And of course, there's many ways to measure effectiveness. We can measure recruiting effectiveness most obviously by number of hires. Are we hitting our targets, our hiring targets? Then drilling down more, we can investigate whether the candidates we want to hire actually accept our offers. In other words, number of offers accepted divided by number of offers made. Then further, we can measure effectiveness by how long does it take to make a hire, or how long does it take from application review stage to offer accepted. Alternatively, time to fill, which is measuring the time from the job posted to the start date. We can also look at where our best candidates come from, evaluating the number of offers made per source. For example, are candidates given offers mostly coming from LinkedIn, Indeed, Stepstone, or Zing? And based on which one this is, where should we be putting our money? So as you can see, framing our approach in terms of research questions rather than throwing basic metrics out, we can build a narrative to share updates on different elements of recruiting effectiveness. And while it's great to be able to package this together and share to company leaders, I think the real value comes from benchmarking, or taking these measurements on an ongoing basis and evaluating the trends. So did our effectiveness improve this week over last week, last month over the previous month, from this quarter to the last quarter? I think evaluating changes and why they may have happened is the real objective here. And I think coming at it from this perspective is what will make HR data the most relevant at any company.
Is there anything, excuse me, it's again me, me again, asking questions. Because if you can just go back maybe one to the slide, you said, okay, the headline question would be how effective is our recruitment, and then you make these sub questions on answering these questions. Is there any process, tool? How do I narrow this down? Or are there any mistakes I can make to answer this question in a wrong way? Because I generally really like the idea to come from a question and not from the metric, because that, at least for me, makes it much more approachable and much more, yes, I really want to have the answer to that question, instead of, do I want to calculate this metric? Maybe not, but I want to have this answer. So I think that's a really great approach. I'm just wondering, is there anything that really can go wrong or I should be aware of?
I don't think so, actually. I think that if
Yay.
you're having this conversation with one of your leaders and they're telling you, this is what I want to know, how effective is our recruitment? Then you have the conversation of, well, how do you define effective? What is effectiveness? And I think in this discussion of like, what do you want to know? Why do you want to know it? Why is this a measure? I think the key question to ask is why. Like, why do you want to know this? Because yeah, you can just throw in a bunch of KPIs here, and then you have a lot of numbers, but what do they all mean, right? So connecting this to the bigger picture and yeah, making it relevant, I think is something you can do by having these conversations and asking the right questions.
Yeah, so you would say it's a good approach to actually ask leaders or managers within the organization, okay, what are concerning recruitment, concerning HR, what are your questions? What can we ask? So do you think that's a doable approach or a good approach?
Yes, I think that's exactly what I've done in the past, actually. Is kind of yeah, I would talk to people at the company to see what kinds of questions came up for them, and taking all these questions together, then you have a list of questions that you need to investigate. Then you need to think about, okay, what data do I need to answer these questions? And then you need to look at, how does this data look right now? And if it doesn't look good, if it doesn't look the way it's supposed to, how can I clean my data and my processes and my definitions to make that possible, to answer this question? So
and
it's
actually,
really,
yeah, sorry, no, you go ahead.
so it's really a backwards approach of, what do you want to know and how can I answer this question?
And I think it really helps having these questions maybe from the leadership team, because earlier we talked about, okay, how can I maybe convince other departments to help me on this topic? Having like the go from the leadership, okay, I really want to have the answer to this question. Maybe this also helps me to get to the answer faster, and having more like more facts to convince departments that might not have HR very high up in their priority.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so now we're at the last challenge, which is getting the right skills and tools. So I've made this lovely diagram, which I kind of consolidated from a few other diagrams I've seen in the past, based on what I think would be nice and relevant for you. So I'm going to zoom out a bit and show you this roadmap of how people analytics can evolve. On an XY graph, which plots value with difficulty, you can see that value increases as difficulty also increases. But that's not to say that there's no value in easy tasks, because as you can see here in the green, I honestly think these are things that you can handle without a lot of huge effort. I think these are things that you really just need the intention and the awareness to do, and probably some basic Excel skills. So let's talk about the progression of people analytics. The first step would be to nail down descriptive analytics, meaning what happened in the past, and maybe what's happening right now. And here we focus on data quality and operational reporting, which were two main topics we discussed earlier. You don't need special tools for this. You don't need external help. You just need a vision for what you want to explore, and you want to make sure that you have the data you need to do that. So then from there, the second step is diagnostic analytics, which is figuring out why something happened. Here we are taking a look at historical benchmarks and taking insights from them. You can see here that we move from hindsight to insight in this arrow. And at this point, we might integrate our various data sources to evaluate the bigger picture and draw more nuanced conclusions. It's entirely possible to get to this point with in-house resources if your BI team has the bandwidth to support. But if not, this is where I'm here to tell you that I'm happy to jump in. Because as a people analytics consultant, I would really like to leverage my experience to help Berlin's companies take their HR data to the next level. This is where my background in data science really helps because I'm able to build integrations, design dashboard solutions, and help your company work towards more advanced people analytics, getting you to this predictive analytics stage, for example, to understand what will happen based on what's going on now, and building forecasting models, automating your workforce planning, which we discussed earlier, even taking it a step further and collaborating to developing prescriptive analytics. In other words, how can we make something happen? How can we make X happen? Here we're doing risk analyses, developing plans to mitigate these risks, developing contingency plans for potential scenarios, and really being as proactive as possible using HR data, as well as other data that we link together. So you can see from the very basics here, you start with hindsight, kind of just getting your facts straight on what happened, what's happening now, going into why did this all happen, to predicting what will happen based on what's happened before, and then taking the more proactive approach of how can we make something happen based on all this data we had before. And once again, value increases as difficulty increases, but it's not to say there's no value here in the first two green blocks. Arguably, these are the most important. So let's see, there we go.
It would be me again. I'm very sorry, but and if you could jump back once more, I was just wondering if there are indications for me as an HR person when I know, okay, I should get help either from you or from the BI team. Is there something like a trade-off of how deep should I dig? How much should I get involved, or maybe what is the least I should get involved to understand at least what I'm talking about before I get other people to help me?
So I think that is a great question.
Yay!
What you can do is, having familiarity with your data from all these various systems that we mentioned earlier with HR, recruiting, and finance. Once you're familiar with these and you know how you'd use them to answer these greater questions, these greater business questions, I think a great time to reach out to an external resource would be, okay, I feel like right now I'm extracting this data and I'm trying to put it together. I'm using VLOOKUPs, I'm using formulas, and it feels really messy and I'm not sure about if this is accurate or not. I feel like this is when it's great to bring someone in externally that's more familiar with it, because maybe they have advice to give you on how you can do it better. In terms of integration, I think that's something that definitely you need an external resource for, myself or your BI team, because this is something definitely more technical that unless you have the background in data engineering, analytics, data science, it's not something that you would be able to do comfortably.
Okay, so actually when I start losing confidence about the topic, when I feel I'm not too sure if the numbers I'm presenting here are really the right ones, are really good, are true at the end of the day, then it's time to look out for some help either internally or externally.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you.
Great. So to wrap it all up, we have the challenges outlined here and the solutions on the right. So the first challenge was getting started, which is accessing and understanding HR data. The solution there is to get to know your data sources and to reach out for help from your customer success person or your sales representative for each system to get to know the system better if that's an option. Also contacting other departments at your company, for example, finance and BI, to fully familiarize yourself with that data, as that's super helpful. Second challenge was data quality, which was ensuring ongoing accuracy and consistency. So the solution there is to align definitions and processes to make sure your foundations for good data are there. Third, we had reporting, which was making HR data relevant to leaders. And what you can do about this is to ask and answer relevant questions. Then last, you have resourcing, which is getting the right skills and tools. And here, the solution that I would suggest would be people analytics consulting. So that's basically what I had to share with you today. And I'm really hoping that the talk really broke down for you what problems exist right now, what barriers there are to entry, how you can overcome them step by step, and hopefully it made the topic of people analytics a little bit less intimidating and more approachable, and gives you some place to start on your journey.
Thank
So
you so much, Diana.
you're
Thank you
welcome.
for sharing this with us. And I have to say, I really feel relieved. I have to admit, I don't consider myself a data person too much, but really, I think the way we talked about it today really, just make me feel more confident, and also just jumping in, getting the foundations right, and see how far we can get, and then from there starting from help. So I have to admit that I'm quite sad that I don't have any data at hand to analyze at the moment. I really feel I should get started, and I really loved the idea on how we can also use people analytics can also help us to connect more to the company, to make sure that we all speak the same language, because as you said, so many other departments are working with data, or and also are arguing or making their arguments build on data when they negotiate on budget, when they negotiate on resources, they use their data, and it's so valuable and so important for HR also have that data ready. And I also like the idea of getting a vision on how on what you want to explore, and seeing people analytics more on like being like this explorer or detective, going out, finding out stuff and giving the right answers. And I think this picture makes this whole thing, as we already mentioned, much more approachable. And I think think it really helped us all a lot, and I'm really happy that we have quite some time left for your questions. So we already have questions within the chat. Everything that comes up to your mind at the moment, things you want to ask Deanna, now is the time. If it's all right for you, I would just collect them, ask them to Deanna. Deanna is giving you the answers, and don't be shy, just put them in there, and let's see what's already going on. Yeah, I think one very, very interesting question is if there are any knowledge or learning sources that you can recommend, Diana, to dive deeper into the topic to get more knowledge about it.
Yeah, so I think Josh Burson he has a lot of really great content on people analytics, as well as David Green. So there are two people that I follow on LinkedIn, and they've had really good posts. And as well, I've looked at content from McKinsey and from what's the other consulting firm? Deloitte. They have a lot of great like PDFs you can look at. So that's great content as well.
Yeah, maybe you wanna share. Maybe if it's feasible, maybe you want to just type in the two names into the chat that we have it, and we're also going to share it via LinkedIn later, of course. But
get back to here the Zoom.
No worries. If it's then we just do it. Then we share it afterwards. That's just fine. Oh yeah, there's another very, very interesting one. Here comes the question, basically, how to focus on the most important facts. So maybe I give you also the other text that is written here. So the question is, how do you put together integrated reporting quarterly with data about recruiting, HR, and finance without overburden the management with too many numbers? How to focus?
I think it goes back to having this conversation with your leaders and actually asking them, what do you want to know? Okay. Because you're only at risk of sharing too much if you don't have that conversation and you're just throwing numbers at them. So it all goes back to this conversation of what's important for you and how can I give that to you?
Okay, so but are there questions that do you ever experience any questions coming from management team, from leadership, where you would say, these are questions, I don't know, that can't be answered by people analytics or are super difficult to be answered by people analytics? Is there anything you can think of?
Yeah, there's been several times before where people have asked me for things that at the moment are not feasible with the current state of the data. So I think kind of providing that transparency of why we're not able to deliver something and what we're doing about that is really all you can do if that's something that that's the challenge, right? And it all goes back to, once again, asking the right questions, figuring out what questions to ask, figuring out what pieces need to exist to answer those questions, and working to kind of get that data the way it needs to be so you can answer that question. And as I mentioned, it is kind of a lengthy process sometimes, depending on how big your company is and how many people are in HR and recruiting and how many people need to align to get the right processes and right data. It can take 3 months, right? But I
Okay.
think the important thing is to start working on it as soon as possible and to basically be able to map your past data to your future data and your present data.
Yeah. All right. Maybe you want to close your the presentation so we can see
Sure.
each other.
There we go.
Excellent.
Oh, now I can see the chat as well.
Yay! Isn't it nice to see all of them? Another question was how, I just have to find it again, how you can use people analytics to not analyze just certain situation or giving certain metrics, but actually evaluate processes. So Sarah is asking which data can be analyzed within the HR team to see if processes are working or are successful. For example, Sarah was reading about doing onboarding surveys to analyze the onboarding process.
Sure. So onboarding surveys are an excellent way to take a pulse on how did the employee feel when they're joining the company. I think what's really cool that you could do here is to try to link these onboarding survey responses, like whether their impression was positive or negative, to maybe their performance down the road. For example, you could see like, okay, like based on if somebody enjoyed their onboarding experience, does this have an effect on their performance later and also their employee satisfaction? Their engagement, these kinds of things. So this is, I think, where connecting data sources becomes super valuable, because you can take these data points that you have early on and see if they're indicators of how well the employee does later.
Mm-hmm. And also you can use, like setting up your own surveys, you can actually create your data points. So if you don't have them already within your company, you then just create, it's quite some work, but you can create them. All right, there are many questions, so I'm just going to read some more out. And the next question is about learning and development, also very interesting topic, I think, when it comes to people analytics. And the question is from Gosha asking, what is, in your opinion, the best way to get insights on the skills within your organization? How to connect it with hiring and learning and development decisions?
So with skills, that's actually an entire project you can do, skills mapping, right? I think this is something that, of course, is better to do as the company is smaller, because once you have a foundation here, you can always build on it and add more skills and assign more skills to people at the company. When you have a big company, it's huge effort to get this established. But as the company is smaller, definitely taking the time to speak to managers, figuring out like what skills exist in their company, in their team, and mapping that out, assigning this to employees in your HR system or your L&D system, and figuring out, okay, so these people on this team and these roles have these skills, and highlighting these certain people who are super good performers. Then when you look at who's a good performer, you can figure out, okay, for this role, this person's a great performer. What makes them great? What skills do they have? What kind of experience do they have? And in the recruitment process, what you can do is look at these people who are model employees for this role and try to find candidates who match these qualifications.
So we would have to align our findings that we have in performance and skills already in the company, and then make sure that when we make decisions concerning recruiting and learning and development, that we actually take the same consistent criteria to then match. So again, it's about like quality of our data, being making good definitions by meaning say, okay, there's a skill, let's say something like being a team player, then it's like, then our metric is like team player, and it's not being good working in teams. So because then again, we don't have like the comparable data.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So to reiterate, what you would do is to map skills for all of the employees at your company. Look at performance scores if you have them. Ideally, you have them, and figure out what makes a great performer for each role. And when you're writing job descriptions, or you're in whatever way trying to attract candidates to hire for a certain job, you look at these model employees for this role, and you're trying to hire people that are similar to them.
Mm-hmm. And there's another question, like also adding to like learning and development. And there's a question on basically return on investment when it comes to training investments. Is this something you would suggest? Are there metrics that at least are maybe indicating how much useful, or how useful trainings or workshops or whatever have been? Is this something you have insights to share with us?
Sure. So I think the first thing I can think of is, is training worth it? It depends on, okay, I'm going to take the example of sales, because sales is where, for example, you actually have people generating revenue. You can take a look at maybe the revenue that comes out of people that have had a certain sales training versus a group of people that haven't had the training. And if you can see the difference, it's really clear in this A/B test that people who have had training either are doing better, the same, or not as good as people who haven't had it. So I think doing these this analysis, this A/B testing analysis of whether training makes a difference, is definitely valuable to do, because it's giving you this, once again, benchmark of what is it like when we don't have it, and what is it like when we do have it. And when you see that there's an improvement when you do have it, that's something that I think gives you the buy-in from your leaders to continue doing training.
Okay, so again, it's having consistent data. So it's not only useful to have like, okay, to measure like the costs or the investments you do in training, but you have to have actually also clear expectation of what to expect from your team. They have to have clear goals, so that at the end of the day, if you want to see how useful, how impactful was the training, you have to have something to compare with. So make sure you have goals right within your team, and then you can see how the return on investment on, for example, trainings is.
Exactly. And I think with trainings, you could measure performance before and after the training, and you could also measure employee satisfaction. Because as you know, as all HR people are probably super aware of, developing and training employees is what keeps them engaged. So to see the noticeable difference in how an employee feels before and after the training, I think is also something that helps you to highlight the value of training.
Sure, great point, yes. We have another question, and this question concerns again on data points that are out of our field of influence, so to say. The question is how to get high quality benchmarks, maybe from the relevant industry. The question is if there are resources that you can recommend to use to not only compare or benchmark within your company, but maybe with other companies from the same industry.
I am actually I've never worked with benchmarks from between companies, and I
Mm,
think while they can be useful maybe for larger companies, I think with smaller companies, like there's just so many variations in how things are run and industries. Um, I'm not really sure where to find resources for this, but um, that's a great question.
would you say, I mean, I find this point very interesting because I hear that quite often, especially leaders, CEO ask, okay, how are other companies doing? How are we doing in comparison? What is the industry benchmark and how are we doing on this? So would you say that when it comes to people analytics, or when is it useful to compare your people analytics to other companies? Would you say that there is that there's a criteria when you say, okay, now that is useful and maybe not, that is not so useful?
I think to compare to other companies, like maybe the most important and obvious thing would be compensation, because you need to compensate your employees according to what the market value is, right? If you're undercompensating, your employees will leave and go somewhere else.
Mm,
So I think, yeah, most obvious one is compensation. I think it's hard to benchmark things like employee engagement and performance
mm.
because these look so different at different companies. Um, what else is there that you could benchmark against other companies? That's a tough one, actually. I'm not sure I have an answer, to be honest.
Yeah, no worries. Maybe if there's anything coming up your mind, as I said, we're going to keep on this conversation maybe via our LinkedIn group or just share information. So it's not that it's limited only to the discussion today. And now I have a quite recent question. So somebody who's like really taking into account the current situation. And first of all, thanking you for the very insightful presentation, but also wondering, from your perspective, how was the COVID situation made an impact on people analytics, especially recruitment? It can be hard to justify the situation if we look at data numbers, or is it not? Also, how should we take like the COVID situation into account when we look into our data at the moment?
So I think depending on what company you work for,
Yeah.
maybe COVID has actually increased your company's activity, right? I
Hmm.
think in a lot of cases companies may not be doing well.
Hmm.
So I mean, I think the best thing to do is just to be aware of when the pandemic started and kind of have this like cutoff, right? Like I think around March is when
Hmm.
you start to see a huge impact on businesses, whether it's good or bad.
Hmm.
And kind of just being aware that this is where this cutoff is and seeing if there's a big jump here, you know why that there's a jump there, right? And I think when you look at the data, when you see certain trends and changes, you ask why did this change? Why is it like this? And so to answer the question, I think a lot of times, like when you see these big jumps, maybe it's because of COVID, maybe it's not, but it's also important to evaluate other factors happening at the company during this time. So I think it's going to vary a lot based on, you know, what happened at your company, what changes happened organizationally. But I think being aware of when these big milestones associated with COVID happened can give you context on why certain fluctuations happened in your data.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And if any of you have any follow-up question, just please use the chat also for that. It's not only because we touched one question once, there are no follow-up questions allowed. So if you want to, please just go ahead. And we have another very interesting topic, I think, for a question. And there, I don't know if you have any experience with this, but when the famous German Betriebsrat, Workers' Council, come into enter the stage. So of course these sometimes make things more, let's say, complex. Do you have any tips on how to convince the Workers' Council to agree to measurements on performance and things like that? Do you have any experience, or maybe just tips to convince people that are usually very hard to convince?
I have never personally collaborated with a workers'
Yeah.
council, so I don't have any direct experience here. But If I had to think about a response to this, I think it might be the same kind of conversation you would have with other people at your company, in which you're trying to convince them of the value of what you're doing. So really thinking about how does measuring individual performance benefit the employee, but also the company. I can think of certain things that, for example, measuring performance allows you to reward high-performing employees. And you can kind of pitch it as, look, this is not really like intentioned. We're not trying to punish people who are not doing well. We're just trying to reward people who are and make sure they're feeling recognized so that they want to stay. Because of course, if you have really hardworking people who are doing really well and you're not rewarding them, whether that's by recognition or compensation increase or perhaps a promotion, then they'll leave, right? They're not going to feel appreciated. They're going to find some other place where they do feel appreciated. So I think that's the value really of performance reviews. And I guess when you connect it to training, which is, I think, I guess that's also part of the question. Training is a part of that. Training is a part of improving performance and improving employee engagement and satisfaction. So I think like really the argument for all of this is that you know, you're trying to give employees a better experience and to reward them. And it's not about trying to catch people who are not doing well, but more, you know, if they're not doing well, like how can we change that? So just really changing, like shifting the narrative from like performance as a way to like catch bad performers to as a way to reward people and to help people who aren't doing so well.
Excellent. And I'm super happy to see that there are also that we managed at least somehow some networking. So people are already connecting to each other, offering to help each other out on certain topics. That's really great to see that it's at least back at some little points, even so we can't see each other in person. As far as I see it from the chat, we answered all the questions in here. If I missed a question, if there's anything in your head at the moment that we should tackle today and that you would like to ask Deanna today, it's now is your chance. Otherwise, as I said, we are super happy to continue this conversation on a different level, but we are going to share the presentations, we are going to share the insights with you, so you will have it all later on. And if we have any more things that we think, especially Deanna, that should be shared with you, we will also do so, probably mainly over our LinkedIn group, but probably also accessible for everybody, so you will not miss it. But if there are no more questions coming in, I would like to thank everybody, especially Deanna, for sharing this very, very insightful presentation with us. And if you like today's event, we would be more than happy if you share it on LinkedIn or on whatever social media channel you are in. We are more than happy and probably going to approach you also directly if you give us feedback. As Pia mentioned at the beginning, we are on a learning journey ourselves to make the best out of the current situation, to offer you the most productive formats, to give you the speakers and the topics you need to really evolve and to really develop in your role. So our feedback, every feedback is really much appreciated. And though from my side, there's nothing left to say than have a lovely day. Even so, here in Prenzlauer Berg, it's raining cats and dogs, but nevertheless, enjoy your day. Thank you again so much, Deanna, for being here, and thanks to all of us. I think we were at one point we were over 60 people, so really incredible. Thank you everybody for showing up so early this in the morning, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you all in our next format, and I'm really excited on how this is going to be then. Okay, so all of you have a great day. Thank you so much and hope to see you soon. Bye.